that, and the gendarmes ran off. And it turned out those two Arrow Cross men were Jews. They were disguised. They were disguised in Arrow Cross, and they saved us. And we got back. But it was only a temporary thing because we were being assaulted daily by different threats. And so we were in our apartment. And then on November 9th, 1944, we were figuring that we were imminently going to be liberated. The Nazis came into our house and drove us all out. They separated the men from the women and children. And there was a square in front of our house, and that's where we were. And my dad was taken off to one side, and my mother had grabbed she had some bread, not too much, but she had some bread in the house, and she took the bread and broke it in half. And then she put a kerchief on my head to make me look like a little girl, and said, "Go take it to your dad." And I remember running. I ran from my mother's side to the other side. Then I saw a little opening, and I ran up to my dad, and I gave him the bread. And all I remember him touching my head. And I ran back to my mother, and that was the end. My dad was taken on there was a forced march, and they were on trucks and all this, but they were taken away, and he ended up in Bergen-Belsen concentration camp. So we came back, and so we were there, and we were still hoping we would get freed, and I kind of felt at that point that I had lost my dad, and we didn't know. So we were there, and one day, the Nazis came, and they drove us down again out to the square, and my mother held my hand as we went downstairs, down the steps, and as the other occupants were being driven out of the building, she edged to the right where there was a cart standing near a glass door. And all of a sudden, she just lurched against the glass door, still holding on to my hand, and fell down dead on her back, or seemingly dead. And there was a guard at the doorway, and he was driving out the other occupants, and he was holding a gun, and I think I screamed to him that my mother is dead. And at that point, one of his cohorts told him to get going. And then my mother opened her eyes, and she opened her eyes and said, "Close the door." And I went to the front, I closed the door, and we went back upstairs. So this was, yeah. My mother she protected me so many times. She was a remarkable woman. And then, so we went back to the apartment, and we stayed put. And we heard the cannons, and and we knew that we were going to be liberated soon. And sure enough, one day, it was now 1945 in February. Before that, I forgot to say, when we moved in, the ovens were not working because the gas lines had been ruined. And my mother, this is before my dad was taken away, my mother had this idea of going down to the bombed out houses. So they went down to the bombed out houses, they took bricks, and she looked for broken sinks, and she went back up, and she made she built an oven on the side, facing the side street. She built an oven, and it was working, and she was able to boil water and make quasi-soup or whatever. So she did, and she became so popular with that others, the neighbors also wanted to do it. So she built quite a few of these ovens. She was so inventive with it. So anyway, that was then. But so here, we felt in February of 1945 that we were going to be liberated. And my mother kept on yelling at me not to go to the windows, but I said, I have to, and I did. So I ran to the side window, and I saw 10 Nazi Germans digging up the cobblestone street to prevent any tanks from crossing. The 10 of them, and I was watching that, and then I ran to the front window, and I was the one who saw the Russian tanks coming in this way. I saw some Russians emerge. They started shooting. They started shooting at the Nazis, and I grabbed a chair, and I threw it out the window. Hopefully I hit one of the Nazis. I don't know. But my mother was very strict, and but then at that point I was free to misbehave, and I did. So we were liberated that day by the Russians, and I ran downstairs, and I met one who was 18. He couldn't speak English. I mean, he couldn't speak Hungarian, rather. And he and I communicated. He gave me his hat, his fur hat, and he put it on my head. And he said Sasha, and I gave him my name. And then he invited me to climb up the tank, which I did. I climbed up, and I saddled the cannon and went boom, boom, boom. I was delighted. But we had some difficulties with the Russian soldiers. They started doing some brutal stuff. First of all, with women, they were just, they brutalized them, and there was quite terrible events that happened. The other thing that they did, they loved watches. And you would see Russians wearing 6, 7 watches on their arm that they stole from whoever they found. They loved every one of them, you could see, with watches. And there was a man down the street whose name was Weinstock, who was a watchmaker. And some Russian soldiers, they found, I think, in a bombed out house, a grandfather clock. And they took it to this Weinstock. They discovered that he was a watchmaker, and they ordered him to make, I think, 10 watches or whatever it was out of the grandfather clock and give him the change. And when he tried to explain to them that this was not possible, they shot him dead. So these were things that we started hearing about what's going on, and it was very dangerous. However, one day we were hungry, and my mother noticed that some Russian soldiers. Let me see what time it is. Some Russian soldiers were cooking some soup in a cannon shell. It smelled good. And my mother, who spoke Russian, she said to me, go down, take this pot, go down and say, Daimo malo soup, give me some soup, and then say, Maminka chvora, my mother is sick. So I went down, and I did that. And what turned out, a Russian soldier said, okay, and he took me into a doorway, and he urinated in the pot. And I ran away, and I ran back crying. And at that point, we were starving, and we went to the farm country, my mother and I, and with some clothes we had, some used clothes, and she traded them in for some food. And we came back to Budapest, and We got deathly ill from the richness of the food. I remember she made me a whole bunch of eggs, and I think that's what got me. But we ate a lot. We were not unaccustomed to eating. So at that point, we had one more event that happened with the Russians that became the deciding factor for us to make a change. 4 Russians came into our apartment, 4 Russian soldiers. And by this point, I was 11, almost 11. And I was aware, I knew what was going on. And one of them was eyeing my mother. And I decided, I went up to this guy and I grabbed for his revolver, his holstered revolver. And he grabbed my hand and he lifted me up and he kissed me and he said something to me that my mother later told me. And they left, the 4 of them left, but they didn't touch my mother. And my mother said, what he said, you will make a great Russian soldier. But that event became a triggering point. My mother heard that there was a Zionist organization. There were Zionist organizations, Hashomer Hatzair for grown-ups and Dror Habonim for children in Budapest, and that we're going to go there and we're going to go to Palestine. We're going to go to Palestine, and at this point, my mother was still confident that my dad somehow would make it back, and so she left addresses where we're going to be at the various places where we had lived, figuring that he was going to go from place to place and to look for us. So we did that. So my mother went to Hashomer Hatzair, and I went to Dror Habonim, and it was most enjoyable. I really loved it. And then came my birthday, which happens to be tomorrow, July 23. And this is my best birthday present I ever had. I returned, they were celebrating my birthday, and the head of Dror Habonim, he cradled my head, and he says, your dad is back. And I ran from where we lived to Hashomer Hatzair, up, she was in an apartment several floors up, and sure enough, there was my dad. I mean, part of my dad. He was really, very thin. And I remember sitting on his lap, kissing him and telling him I loved him. And he told me he loved me. And at that point, the grown-ups decided we will have to escape Budapest. To get to Palestine, we would have to catch a boat in Greece. And they figured the way to do that, because the Russians in Hungary, they would not give any exit visas. The way they did it is they got fake passports, Greek passports. And then the head of it said, I'm going to have to teach you how to speak Greek, how to pretend to speak Greek, so that as we are leaving, so that we don't get caught. So how do we do that? And he said, who knows Dror Habonim? And everybody raised their hand. They knew the prayer, Dror Habonim. And he says, well, this is how we're going to speak Greek to each other. I will say to you, Dror Habonim, and you will say the next word. What is the next word? Shevet Achim Gan Miyachad? No. Dror Habonim Shevet. Well, whatever it was. So it was going back and forth that way. And when everybody was able to respond, He said, now you speak Greek. Now we can go to Palestine. So we got, they arranged, they got a locomotive and 2 cattle cars. One of them, we all trooped into one cattle car, and the other one we took with us because there was not much fuel, and if we needed fuel, they would dismantle the other cattle car. So we went from Budapest down to Yugoslavia, and from Yugoslavia we went up to Greece, and when we got to the Greek border, we were driven back because there was an uprising in Greece. And so the leader decided that instead of going there, we're going to go to Hachshara in Italy. And he knew of one. So we doubled back all the way across Yugoslavia, and we went to Turin, Italy, where the Hachshara was in a farm. It was a farm. And we stayed there for a number of months, and we were told that we were going to be, a truck is going to show up, trucks are going to show up, and they're going to take us to where the boats are. And but it will happen middle of the night, so we should be all packed for the trip. And after about 4 months or so, the trucks arrived, and we all got out. We got on the trucks, and they took us off, me and another boy and the parents and me. The reason we were too short, because they explained in those days the boats moored off the coast of Palestine, Israel, 100 yards, 200 yards, and the adults would pay a rope from there to the shore, and then all the adults, all the people would hold on to the ropes and move from where they were to shore. And they said, well, I couldn't reach the rope, and neither could this other boy. And my dad said, well, we'll carry him. And they said, no, that's no good. And they left, and they went to Palestine. And in fact, subsequently, when I went to Israel, I visited the people who went there. And my parents decided to come here, to come to the United States. And my dad had a brother who escaped from Czechoslovakia, Leopold, who lived in Brussels, and so we were going to go to Brussels, and there we were going to apply for a United States visa affidavit. And so we went to Ventimiglia in Italy. My parents had a few francs, and we hired a fisherman, and they rowed us across from Ventimiglia to Menton, France. And from there we went to Nice, and in Nice a Jewish organization helped us get all the way to Belgium. But there was an incident that happened in Nice. How am I on time, by the way? 8:45? Yeah, we're almost here. We almost got to the I want to share with you an incident that happened to me in Nice. I was telling my dad I wanted to see palm trees.